Looking for the answer. Miami sun, where I know that bitches love when it rain. My mother's son, but all my cronies keep it a day. Been through the system, but I ain't tryna go through it again. Shooter on parole, and I know that you shoot it again. For the ops and their friends, I'm too real to pretend. All that time in the trap, got me timing.
Good morning, world, and welcome back to What the F Happened This Week. My name is East Brave, and welcome to your new home for real news, where we cut through the noise with no fluff, no corporate spin, and absolutely zero bullshit. Every week, we break down the biggest stories in politics, pop culture, world events, and everything in between with sharp insight, raw honesty, and a perspective you won't get anywhere else. Before we get into it, I want to thank you for your support. If you enjoy the content, make sure you like, subscribe, and share our video. It helps the channel grow, and it keeps independent journalism alive. I am an independent journalist, not a corporate newsroom. Everything in today's episode is gathered from publicly available sources, credible outlets, and reputable platform. Of course, I do my best to bring you accurate and balanced information, but if you catch anything that needs correction or clarification, feel free to drop it in the comments. All right, enough of the intro. Let's not waste any more time. Let's find out what the happened this week. Today, we're going beyond the headlines. We're looking at the story that reflects something deeper about love, mental health, systems that fail, and what justice really means. Nick Reiner was diagnosed with schizophrenia years ago and was in treatment at the time of his parents' death. His medication was adjusted in the weeks before the tragic incident. There's no confirmed timeline showing exactly how long he's been treated or how many times his prescriptions were changed. What's certain is this wasn't a sudden moment. It was a long, ongoing struggle, a life shaped by cycle of care and crisis, trying to find stability in a complicated system. Most people think of medication like taking a painkiller. Open the bathroom medicine cabinet, grab a pill, take a swig of water, and you feel better. You see it in movies from the 80s and the 90s so often that it became a cultural shorthand. But real psychiatric treatment isn't like that. With mental illnesses like schizophrenia, each medication change is like adding a new ingredient to a delicate chemical cocktail in the brain. Every shift impacts neurotransmitter, moods, and impulse control. Over time, that cocktail can create instability, even when doctors are trying to help. Mental health medication isn't rare in the US, it's common. According to the CDC, more than 1 in 10 US adults take antidepressants, and many take them long term. These drugs are among the most widely prescribed medicine in the country, showing how normalized medication has become for managing mental health challenges. But widespread use doesn't necessarily translate into stable, effective long-term care. It often becomes symptoms management. And when care fragments, people slip through the cracks. This is especially relevant in Los Angeles, the same city where the Reiner tragedy unfolded, because LA also housed one of the densest concentration of homelessness in the country, Skid Row. Perhaps you heard of it. In an area of roughly 50 blocks, there are nearly 3,800 people experiencing homelessness, and around 36 to 38% of them report a serious mental illness. Others struggle with substance use disorder or multiple disability. That's thousands of people living with ongoing mental health needs without consistent treatment or housing. For many on Skid Row, the cycle of emergency care, police contact, hospital visits, and survival on the streets reflect a system that lacks continuity, similar to the broader failures we see in mainstream mental health care. So here's the ethical question. Is the system actually built to help someone stay stable for a lifetime, or is it built to react to crisis? When medication gets changed, when housing isn't stable, when therapy is episodic and wait lists are long, it creates a cycle. People fall, people get pulled back briefly, and then fall again. This isn't about blaming doctors or families. It's about pointing to a structure that often leaves the most vulnerable with the least stability. Rob and Michelle Reiner didn't give up on their son. They loved him unconditionally. The same kind of love, celebrated in faith and in stories throughout history. They gave him life, they fought for him, they stayed. And ultimately, they gave their lives in attempt to help him. That's not just devotion, that's love in its purest, most tragic form. Nick faces the justice system. At this point, he hasn't entered a plea in court. There's talk that an insanity defense or mental competency evaluation could be a part of his legal strategy, but nothing of that has been filed yet. What's at stake now is whether the court can balance mental illness with responsibility, fairness, and justice. Now, this raises a question. Does he deserve a fair trial? Absolutely. Now, it's worth noting that Rob and Michelle Reiner were wealthy. They could afford specialists, treatments, and resources that most families can't. And yet, even with every advantage money could buy, the story ended in tragedy. That makes the need for fairness and for systematic reflection even more urgent. This isn't a story with easy answers. It's about families carrying impossible burdens, a healthcare system that can heal and hurt, and a society that promotes medication but doesn't always ensure support. It's about thousands of people on Skid Row, on the streets, untreated, unseen, and about a love so deep it lasted long past what most people could imagine. Nick's case is tragic, but it's also a mirror held up to all of us asking, how do we care for the most vulnerable among us? How do we balance compassion and accountability? And how do we build the systems that don't wait for tragedy before acting? That's the conversation we owe to every family, every patient, every community, and hopefully one that will continue long after today. Today, we're looking at a major development in Australia, a country already known for strict gun laws after the deadly Bondi Beach attack in Sydney earlier this month. In response to the attack, the New South Wales Parliament passed broad reforms including cap on gun ownership. Most individuals can own only 4 firearms, with exemptions for primary producers and professional shooters who can hold up to 10. Stricter licensing requirements, including renewal every 2 years. Limits on semi-automatic weapons and magazine capacity. Enhanced police powers over public safety. Authority to ban or limit public protests following declared terror incidents for up to 3 months. These changes are part of the Terrorism and Other Legislation Amendment Bill 2025, making New South Wales one of the first states to pass such comprehensive reform after a terror attack. Now, I personally support these new gun laws. They still allow responsible citizens to own firearms, but they limit the number, type, and ammunition of guns, which can make a real difference. As I said in my previous episode covering the Bondi shooting, here is the uncomfortable truth. No set of gun laws can eliminate every threat. Guns don't people, people people. But by limiting access to high capacity or semi-automatic weapons and controlling ammunition, government can lessen the destruction if another shooting does occur. This is a measured approach, balance individuals' rights with public safety. I do have a concern with banning protests outright. Protest has been a fundamental human tradition since the dawn of civilization, a way for people to hold the system accountable and demand change. I've seen it myself. As a child, I watched the video of Rodney King beaten by police in Los Angeles. At first, I thought it was a fake. I was only 6 years old. My sister and I even downloaded it on a platform called LimeWire back then. Later, I saw it on TV news. When the officers weren't held accountable, the city erupted. Decades later, the same patterns repeated with George Floyd. These protests are necessary and historically vital, no matter the cost. Now, I say all that to say this. My issue is with protests tied to ideology or religion that spreads hate, incite violence, or disrupt communities. Let me break that down a bit more. Disruption to communities. Some protests block traffic, public transportation, or access to essential services, affecting residents who aren't involved in creating tension. So imagine, your grandma has a heart attack. There's a designated walkway where you can safely protest without having to obstruct traffic. People decide to just obstruct traffic. There's an ambulance that's just trying to get to my grandma's house, and they can't get through this crowd. So that's what I mean. Incitement of violence or hate speech. Certain protests include aggressive rhetoric, chants, or display that can escalate tension, provoke counter-protests, or incite violence. Shifting from awareness to division. While the intent may be to raise awareness, some focus more on political or religious messaging, polarizing communities instead of fostering understanding. Impact on public perception. Large or disruptive protests can alienate neutral observers, unintentionally undermining the original message of human rights or justice. Legal or safety concerns. Authorities sometimes respond with restriction when protests cross public safety lines, fueling debates about civil liberties. So, the problem isn't with the advocacy or raising awareness for causes like Palestine, but with the protests that become unsafe, disruptive, or used for inflammatory messaging. They can harm local communities and obscure the intended humanitarian focus. Blanket bans aren't the solution because history shows that legitimate protests are essential for accountability, but targeting harmful rhetoric is a step in protecting communities. These reforms also reflect a growing recognition that hate speech can lead to hate violence, and communities need protection. Australia is taking a step to address this connection, not by silencing legitimate grievances, but by ensuring that harmful rhetoric and extremist messaging don't escalate into real world tragedy. This is a step forward and a global example of balancing freedom of expression, public safety, and ethical responsibility. To those affected by the Bondi Beach tragedy, our thoughts are with you. The government stepping up with these reforms is a positive, proactive step and a reminder that communities can act together to prevent future harm. We also have lessons here from other countries. Canada is a multicultural melting pot. We have our own challenges, but that hasn't stopped us from working, forming friendships, and building communities across cultures and races. We can look to each other, learn from these reforms, and come together to make our society safer while respecting our freedoms. Legendary video game creator Vince Zampella has died at the age of 55. He was killed in a single vehicle crash on December 21st, 2025, on Angeles Crest Highway in San Gabriel Mountain, north of Los Angeles. The Ferrari he was driving veered off the road, struck a concrete barrier, and caught fire. Zampella died at the scene. Authorities have not confirmed the cause of crash and is still under investigation. Nothing has been released about any specific contributing factor like speed, alcohol, or mechanical failure. Vince Zampella was a visionary in the video game industry, best known as one of the co-founders of Infinity Ward and co-creator of the Call of Duty franchise, a series that has sold over 500 million copies worldwide and helped define modern first-person shooters. He first broke into game as a developer, working on Medal of Honor, Allied Assault, before finding Infinity Ward with Jason West and Grant Collar in 2002. Under his leadership, the studio released Call of Duty 1, Call of Duty 2, Modern Warfare, and Modern Warfare 2, titles that became benchmark in gameplay, storytelling, and multiplayer design. In 2010, Zampella and his long-term collaborator Jason West were fired from Infinity Ward by Activision amid dispute over contracts, creative control, and expected bonuses. They were subsequently filed lawsuits claiming wrongful termination. After leaving, they co-founded Respawn Entertainment, where Zampella helped create beloved games like Titanfall, Apex Legend, and the Star Wars Jedi series. Respawn later became part of Electronics Arts, which is short for EA, and Zampella was also placed in leadership over Battlefield franchise. Call of Duty continued after Zampella's departure under Infinity Ward, Treyarch, Sledgehammer, and other developers. For many longtime players, though the franchise trajectory shifted over time. Many veterans feel the period from Call of Duty 1 through Modern Warfare 2 2009 represented a creative high point that newer entries struggled to match, and that changes in leadership and corporate direction affected quality. This sentiment is widely discussed among players online and in community forums through perception vary and aren't formal metrics. Zampella's passing is being mourned across the gaming world. Developers, studios, and community figures are paying tribute to him as a visionary leader who shaped not just Call of Duty, but multiple beloved franchises and generational gaming experiences. EA and Respawn statements reflect his influence on how games are made and how players connect. The Call of Duty franchise will continue under new creative teams, and there is a live-action movie in development showing how deeply embedded it is in global entertainment. Now, I have been a Call of Duty player on and off for years. From 2001 and 2010, the franchise was so iconic, and I was there for it. I've witnessed every step of the way. Um, from Modern Warfare, Call of Duty 2, Modern Warfare 2, define a generation of shooters. I did step away for a while after 2000 and I believe 9. I had my first daughter, got married, had another daughter, but in 2021, this was during the pandemic, I did return for Modern Warfare 2, Modern Warfare 3, and even though I enjoyed parts of them, I did notice a shift. For players who stayed through every iteration, many feel that after the original creators were fired and the leadership changed over, the franchise lost some of its early magic. Now, that's just not my take. It's actually a common sentiment in the community, whether it's Black Ops 6 or ongoing discussion around Black Ops 7. The love for the franchise hasn't, disappeared, but the relationship is complicated, a love and hate dynamic that many longtime fans share. Vince Zampella's death is a huge loss for gaming, not just for Call of Duty, but for every world he helped build, every player he inspired, and every developer he mentored. Call of Duty will go on, but the legend behind its beginning is gone. The future of the franchise is uncertain in many ways creativity, culturally, and emotionally for the community that grow up with it. For now, we honor his memory, thank him for what he gave us, and reflect on how a visionary legacy will echo through every shooter, every battlefield, and every match we play for years to come. Rest in peace, bud. Billions. No, trillions of dollars are being funneled into data center worldwide, and it's happening faster than most people realize. But the real question is, who pays for this? And what does it mean for the average person struggling with rising energy costs? In 2025 alone, global data center deals hit a record of 61 billion, fueled by AI cloud infrastructure. Analysis predict that by 2030, the total global investment could top 6.7 trillion. That's not just construction, that includes powering, cooling, networking, and high-end servers that make AI work. North America is leading the charge. The US has already spent 40 to 46 billion this year on data center construction, with monthly spikes hitting 14 billion at a time. Mega deals are also reshaping the market, like the 40 billion acquisition of Align Data Center and Google's 4.7 billion purchase of Intersect, a data center energy company to fuel AI operations. Big tech giants Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Meta are spending hundreds of billions collectively. Hyperscale campuses, AI ready GPU farms, and next gen networking aren't cheap. The demand for computing power is skyrocketing and is driving this historic wave of infrastructure spending. But here's the contrast. While these massive investments pour billions into AI infrastructure, average consumers face rising energy costs and utility bills. The power these data centers require is immense, and ultimately, energy expenses get passed down through rates. So while companies scale to meet AI demand, everyday people like us struggle to keep the lights on. Trillions of dollars, billions of watts, unprecedented growth. Data centers are the backbone of our digital future. But the real cost, it's all of us. And that's the story the numbers alone can't hide. Now that we know who's struggling, let's talk about why the pressure isn't slowing down. Electricity prices are rising across North America. And for millions of households, paying the hydro bill is no longer a routine, it's stressful. One major reason people don't talk about enough is energy demand, especially from data center powering cloud computing and artificial intelligence. Let's start with the data, shall we? Here's the hard numbers. Brace yourself. In the United States, data center currently consume about 4 to 4.5% of all electricity nationwide. That's already a massive load. Pause. Federal and independent energy analysis project that if growth continue at its current pace, data centers could count for between 7 as much as 12% of US electricity demand by the late 2020s. That growth isn't theoretical, it's happening now. More demand means more power generation, more transmission lines, more substations, more grid upgrades. And here's the key point: utilities do not absorb those costs. They finance them, regulators approve them, and the cost is passed down directly to consumers through higher rates. That is why we are all dying each month. Yeah, not one of them. Even when fuel prices stabilizes, infrastructure costs stay locked into your bills for decades. Thank you. Appreciate that. What does that mean for consumers in the United States? Let's talk about its impact. In the US, about 21 million households, roughly 1 in 6, are behind on their utility bills. Around 23 to 25% of households say that they are unable to pay an energy bill at least once in the past year. Roughly 1 in 3 Americans report struggling with electricity or heating costs, often cutting back on food, medicine, or other essentials. About 14 million households carry serious utility debt or have had bills sent to collections. This is not a fringe issue. It's widespread and it's getting worse as rates climb. Now, Canada's system looks different, but the stress is still real. Using national census based data, here it is. About 5.6% of Canadian households are officially classified as energy poor, meaning they spend 10% or more of their after tax income on energy. Broader studies place the numbers closer to 8 to 11%, depending on the provinces and housing condition. Among lower income Canadians, more than 1 in 5 households struggle with energy affordability. Canada Public Utilities and hydro heavy grid help keep prices lower overall. But energy poverty still exists, especially in colder regions and older homes. So, are data centers the only cause? No, but they are a meaningful accelerant because data center increase base electricity demand, force faster infrastructure expansion, lock in long-term costs that consumers pay through rates. They don't cause every price increase, but they do add pressure to the system that already passes costs downward. So let's answer the question clearly and correctly. Which country has more consumers struggling to pay their utility bills? And the answer is the United States by a wide margin. Roughly 30 to 35% of US household reports difficulty paying energy bills. About 1 in 6 are already behind. Millions face shut-off risk or long-term debt. In Canada, the share is significantly lower, generally under 10% nationally, but higher in lower income groups. So here's the bottom line. Both countries are feeling the pressure, but when it comes to struggling to keep the lights on, the data is clear. The United States is leading the way, and not in a way anyone should be proud of. On December the 19th, 2025, Taipei, Taiwan faced a shocking act of violence at the busiest transport hub, Taipei Main Station. A 27-year-old man, Chang Wen, carried out a premeditated attack that left 3 dead and 11 injured. The attack threw smoke grenades in the station during rush hour, causing chaos and confusion. Using the cover of smoke, he started stabbing civilians at random, moving through the station and into nearby public areas, including a shopping complex. Among the victims was a 57-year-old security guard, who bravely tried to stop the attack and tragically lost his life. The suspect fled from police but ultimately fell to his death from a building while being pursued. Authorities revealed the attack was planned for over a year. The suspect had a criminal record, had invaded mandatory military service, and had limited family contact. Investigators have ruled out terrorism or political motives. Taipei authorities heightened security at transport hubs citywide, and the mayor cut short a trip abroad to oversee safety measures. Mental health services were also offered to those affected by the trauma. Taipei, normally considered safe, was suddenly shaken by an act of violence. While the motives remain personal, the attack is a stark reminder of the need for preparedness and public awareness in crowded urban spaces. Christmas morning this year took a dark and unexpected turn in Nigeria. Former US President Donald Trump announced that, under his direction, the US military carried out an airstrike against affiliated militants in northwest Nigeria. These groups have been accused and targeting and killing civilians, primarily Christians, during the ongoing conflict. Now, we have covered the story before, but this time, Trump is stepping in and he means business. Trump posted on Truth Social saying, "Tonight, at my direction as Commander in Chief, the United States launched a powerful and deadly strike against this terrorist scum in northwest Nigeria, who have been targeting and viciously killing primarily innocent Christians. May God bless our military and Merry Christmas to all, including the dead terrorists." My God, this man has no filter. The former president framed these airstrikes as a Christmas message of protection for Nigerian Christians, claiming that he had warned these extremist groups to stop their attacks or there would be hell to pay. U.S. officials say that the strikes were carried out in coordination with the Nigerian government. Nigerian authorities emphasizes that while Christians have been disproportionately affected, the violence affects communities of all faith across the region, and the strikes were a part of a broader effort to fight terrorism. This action comes amid years of attack by extremist groups like West Africa and Boko Haram, who have targeted villages, schools, and markets, creating a security crisis in the northern region of Nigeria. Whether these airstrikes will provide meaningful protection or further escalate the conflict remains to be seen, but Trump's Christmas message was clear. He presented the strike as a direct response to the targeting of Christians and a show of force against extremists. For Nigerian Christians, this Christmas brought both fear and a message of protection from abroad, a stark reminder of how global politics and a local conflict intersect, even on the most sacred of holidays. And of course, here's my take: karma is real. Not a myth, not a bedtime story, not just something you tell your kids to teach morality. Karma is the principle that actions have consequences, and those consequences eventually find their way back. Last year, too many Christian families in Nigeria faced heartbreak and loss because of extremist attacks. The world is a place where wrong and violence don't go unanswered. Call it karma, call it justice, call it consequences. But make no mistake, what you do in this life has a funny way of coming back, sometimes in a way you least expect. Global trade, tariffs, and supply chains. They might sound like numbers on a page, but right now they are telling a story about how the world economy is shifting under our feet. Let's start with countries facing the heaviest impact from US tariffs. Vietnam is currently one of the hardest hit, with about 46 tariffs on good export to the US, including electronics, textile, and footwear. India normally faces around 26%, but certain goods get an additional 25% penalty because of India's continued purchase of Russian crude oil, pushing some exports to roughly 50%. Other countries, including Cambodia at 49%, Switzerland at 39%, Thailand at 36%, China at 34%, and Bangladesh at 37%, are also seeing heavy duties, while Japan, South Korea, and Malaysia sit closer to 24 to 25%. Tariffs don't just sit on paper, they ripple through supply chains and logistic networks. The Logistic Managers Index, which tracks inventory levels, warehouse utilization, transportation activity, and pricing, slowed to 55.7 in November 2025, the weakest growth since mid 2024. Warehouse utilization has even contracted, meaning goods aren't moving as quick, and inventories are softening. Businesses that stock up earlier to beat tariffs are now recalibrating, adjusting to slower consumer demand. And the story isn't just about the US economy. In Canada, the latest data shows real signs of slowing activity. In October 2025, Canada GDP shrank by 0.3, the largest monthly contraction in nearly 3 years, and goods exports like wood, products, and machinery have been hit by tariffs and trade uncertainty. Early November data shows only a very modest 0.1% uptick, indicating muted momentum. Consumer confidence is soft, business investment is cautious, and forecasts from Bank of Canada and OECD suggest slower growth in 2025 and 2026. So here's what all this means. Vietnam, high tariff slows product movement and raises costs. India, 50% sector Pacific penalty and conditional. If India stops buying Russian oil, the extra tariff could be lifted. Warehouse and transportation networks are under pressure, goods are moving slower, and softening demands shows up in both the US and Canada. Economic momentum is cooling across North America, even if headlines GDP figures don't scream recession. Tariffs, slow shipment, and cooling demands aren't just charts on a page, they are real, tangible signs of global economy quietly adjusting under the surface. Understanding tariffs and supply chains metric isn't optional, it's how you see real health of the economy. Prices, availability, warehouse activity, and even subtle shifts in the export tell us more about momentum than any headline ever could. When you hear Afghanistan, what comes to mind? Deserted mountains, endless conflict, people struggling to survive. For millions of Afghans today, this is reality. But to understand why humanitarian crisis is so severe, we need to take a look at history, the politics, and the economy that shaped this country. Afghanistan has been torn by war for over 4 decades. 4 decades. 40 years, man. It's a long time. 1979 to 1989, Soviet invasion. Millions of Afghans became refugees, cities were destroyed, and rural communities collapsed. 1990s, civil war among rival factions left the countries fractured and hungry for stability. 1996 to 2001, Taliban took control, imposing harsh restriction on women and strict religious laws. From 2001 and 2021, US and NATO intervention brought relative stability to cities, schools opened, and women gained some rights. But outside urban areas, insecurity and poverty remain. 2021 US withdrawal and Taliban return to power led to international sanctions, frozen assets, and aid cuts, pushing the economy into near collapse. Taliban rule has restricted education, especially for girls, and limited women participation in the workforce. Afghanistan economy is fragile. Most families rely on agriculture, but drought, floods, and the lack of infrastructure make farming unreliable. About half the population now depends on humanitarian aid, which has been drastically reduced. Over 17 million people are facing severe hunger this winter. Children and women are most vulnerable, suffering from malnutrition and disease. Basic necessities like food, medicine, and shelter are scarce for millions. Organizations are struggling to reach people due to Taliban restriction and limited funding. It's easy to see Afghanistan as a faraway hellhole, but the human suffering is real and urgent. Understanding it matters because empathy connects us to people we'll never meet, helping us support humanitarian aid and policy decisions. History shows us cycles of conflict when countries fail to stabilize. The ripple effect touch neighboring regions and global security. Humanity is universal. Hunger, fear, and loss don't care about borders. Afghanistan is not just a story of war and hardship. It's a story about people surviving impossible conditions, children hoping for school, families hoping for food, and communities trying to endure decades of chaos. Empathy isn't just a nice idea. It's how the world can respond with action, support, and understanding. And knowing the full story is the first step. And that's the story. All right, last story, baby. Let's get the show on the road. For our last story, Nicki Minaj made headlines recently at Turning Point USA America's Fest on December 21st, 2025. She said, "If you are born a boy, be a boy. Boys will be boys, and there's nothing wrong with that." Her words sparked backlash from parts of the LGBT community. UK Pride called for boycotts of her music in some venues, declaring she is not our friend. The controversy isn't about whether she's against the LGBT community, because she isn't. It's about how her words landed and how the reaction reflects the pressure of performing moral boundaries perfectly in today's culture. People get upset when public figures speak bluntly on sensitive topics without filters, even when their intent isn't harmful. Sometimes honesty without tact invites backlash. That's what happened to Nikki. And that's also why this story is worth thinking about. It's not about condemning anyone, it's about responsibility, awareness, and boundaries. This is my take because you guys know that I'm always big on ethics, responsibility, and just boundaries. I support the LGBT community. I always have. But support doesn't mean blind agreement. And that's where people get it twisted. My issue starts when boundaries get crossed. It starts when people start to overstep. Because at the end of the day, ethics matter, responsibility matters, no matter who you are. Identity doesn't excuse bad behavior. Don't overstep, don't act selfishly, don't have dog water ethics. That is a big one for me. It's really that simple. Let me share a personal story with you, okay? When I was in my 20s, my friends and my ex girlfriend and we used to go to this gay club, and it was really fun. It was the big EDM spot in the city, actually. It was the only place where they played techno, rave, music like EDM, that whole scene. It was the only place where they played that music all night long. The vibe was always peaceful, it was always respectful, and I always had a fun time. Now, we weren't actually the only straight group there either. We knew other groups of friends who happened to gather there every weekend as well. Everyone mixed, everyone had fun, nothing but love. I got along with gay people and it was perfectly fine. Then one moment changed everything for me. My ex introduced me to this guy, and how she introduced me was, "This is my boyfriend." Like this is how she introduced me. This is my boyfriend. This is, let's say, Alex, this is my boyfriend. That was how I was being introduced. He leaned in and kissed me on the cheek, and he smiled, and he just gazed at me. And in that split second, my mind froze. I thought to myself, do I punch this guy? If I do, I lose. It's not going to be perceived as manly. And I'd be disrespecting all the good people around me. But if I don't react at all, then that means I'm a punk. And I'm not a punk. So I felt trapped either way. So, I was stuck in that situation. Damn if you do, damn if you don't. But that moment taught me something about boundaries, about consent, about personal space, not hate, boundaries. I never went back to that club, not out of anger, not out of disrespect. My friends kept going, obviously. Other straight groups kept going as well, and that was fine. I just didn't go with them because I just didn't want that to happen again. Now, I've always come with acceptance, with love, but when one person overstep, it can ruin it for everyone. And that's why responsibility matters, because your actions don't just represent you, they reflect your entire community, right? So let's say I was Vietnamese. My parents fled the Vietnam War. When they came here, they had to be on their best behavior, because if they don't come over here with their best behavior, it's going to ruin it all for the entire community that just fled the Vietnam War, coming over to a new country. Got to learn the language, got to learn the culture, got to learn everything and start over with our lives. So, we had to stay in line, because if we don't, again, it will reflect the community. And I think that that is a universal concept to wrap your mind around. Now, let me share a father moment. When my oldest daughter was 3, she needed to use the washroom. Where we were at the time, there were no family washroom. So I had to take her to the boys' side. A guy said, "Bro, take your daughter to the girls' washroom." But I didn't know who was in there. I don't know if there's a grown ass man inside the girls' washroom, and I didn't feel right walking into the women's washroom either. As a father, my job was to protect my daughter. That's it. And perhaps he didn't have any children of his own. He was a much younger guy. And honestly, that was probably the same place Nicki Minaj was coming from. She's a mother. Maybe she doesn't want her son walking into the boys' washroom alone. What if there's a grown man in there with bad intention? Money won't stop that. Fame won't stop that. Success won't protect her child. But if she takes her son into the girls' washroom, suddenly that's a problem too. Notice something though. You rarely hear complaints when a boy wants to use the boys' washroom, because people expect safety, structure, and boundaries. We've seen this tension play out publicly. Adults dressed and drag performing in schools or libraries, sometimes without clear parental notice, sparking backlash. In Edmonton, A Pride Week event at Ross Shepherd High School featured a drag performer, and many parents said they weren't even informed ahead of time. In Montana, lawmakers passed a law banning adults in drag from reading to children in public schools and libraries. Different places, different reaction, same core issue. Where are the boundaries? Even Caitlyn Jenner, a transgender woman and former Olympic champion, has said she doesn't believe transgender women should compete in women's sport. Her reasons were biological, fairness, and protecting girls' spaces. That stance caused backlash, even with the LGBT community. But it does prove something important. Ethics don't belong to one side. Fairness doesn't belong to one group. Ignore them, and everyone pays the price. Which brings us back to Nicki Minaj. Her comments weren't hateful. She said if you were born a boy, that's okay. She's allowed to say that, guys. You reach in. She's also a parent, and protecting your child isn't bigotry, it's instinct. So here's the takeaway: you can support people, you can celebrate diversity, you can even believe in freedom, but you can't erase ethics, you can't ignore boundaries, and you can't pretend responsibility doesn't matter. Because doing the right thing doesn't always feel good in the moment, but it builds trust, it builds respect. It builds a common ground where all of us can coexist, and it keeps people safe. And this is what I've learned about being an adult. Kids choose what feels good right now. Adults choose what's responsible even when it's uncomfortable. That's maturity, that's being human, and that's how we move forward without losing our values. Not extraordinary values, not perfection, just the basic moral standards required to be a decent human being. This week showed us just how fast the world moves, from questions about mental health and responsibility in Nick Reiner's case, to Australia passing sweeping gun and protest laws, to the gaming world mourning legendary developer Vince Zampella, to the massive billion-dollar data center boom shaking the tech and economy, to rising energy demand leaving millions in the US and Canada struggling to pay their bills, to a mass stabbing shocking the city of Taipei, to US airstrike in Nigeria targeting affiliate militant to protect Christians, to global trades and tariffs putting supply chains under pressure, to Afghanistan facing worsening humanitarian crisis, and finally, to Nicki Minaj sparking backlash after her appearance at the Conservative Summit. These aren't just headlines, they are reminders. Every action, every choice, every decision echoes farther than we think. Stay informed, stay critical, stay compassionate, and remember, the world isn't slowing down, and neither are we. That's it for this week. Until next time, this is what the happened this week. Over and out.
Take me back.